Okay, we'll get started here in just under a minute. I see I'm getting emails from people saying leadership pulled me off to do something else. Is there going to be a recording? Okay, so let's get started here. So today we've got Aaron's going to be talking to us about generative AI for the agile mind. Aaron works for Google, and I met Aaron years ago, I think at one of their early DevOps days in Kansas City. Uh, and he's always got very interesting things to say. So I'm very excited about looking at this. A couple other things coming up next week. We're going to be talking about secrets of successful sprints. On the 10th, we're going to talk about the cost of delay. So be watching for those invites coming up. Then we've got Robert's going to be talking to us about managing uncertainty and whether or not we can actually do that. That's coming up on the 24th of next month. Matt Rabel is going to be talking about micro front ends for Java microservices. This is going to be a pretty interesting look at how to stand a tool for kind of standing up example applications using these. I think if you're interested in microservices and micro front ends, it's going to be very, very insightful. So keep looking for that invite coming out. And then we've got Eric Lee is going to be talking to us about Deep Racer. I mentioned this last week, looking at training autonomous vehicles to navigate races and things using AI machine learning. So that's what we've got scheduled. We've got some other ones coming up there, but that's what's on the schedule so far. So back to Aaron. Aaron, I will turn it over to you, letting everybody know there is a Slido poll on the side. If you think of questions you want to ask, go ahead and type them in there, and you can vote each other's questions up and down. And if you do that, let me mute everybody here just to make sure. I'm using a different device, so let me find this one. There we go, mute all. Okay, so nothing embarrassing happens. But if you think of a question as you go, type it into the Slido Q&A, and if you see a question you think's interesting, vote it up or down, depending on what you'd like to see answered. And when we get to the end, Aaron will try to work through as many of those as we can fit in. So, Aaron, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much for coming.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mark. Let's go ahead and get started. First, thank you for the opportunity to share time with you today. Time is the most precious resource that we have, and I'm privileged that you would share some of yours with me today. My name is Aaron Blythe. I'm a customer engineer. I've been at Google Cloud for 3 years now. I recently completed my master's degree in computer science from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, where I focused mostly in machine learning. I'm an artificial intelligence and machine learning specialist at Google Cloud, and I spent 2023 and 2024 solely focused on generative AI. I live in the Kansas City area, and what I prepared for you today is information to share with you about the customers that I've had the privilege to work with over the past couple of years, and I plan to do live demos to display what is currently possible with generative AI, so wish me luck. In roughly the next 45 minutes, I want to cover some of the definitions and personas that will use generative AI, a notional day in the life of a customer. My examples happen to be for a bank, but they should apply widely if you can kind of extrapolate the use case a little bit. I'm going to go over some development use cases. I'm going to do a short discussion on culture, and then I want to delve into where enterprise readiness fits into this landscape. Then we'll wrap up with the Q&A, so keep those questions coming through the Slido and the chat as we go. And in case you've never seen generative AI, I'd like to start with a very simple use case. And I'll move this over onto this screen here. So what I have here is Gemini. You can go to this by going to gemini.google.com, And what I want to do with Gemini is I want to upload an image of a plant that was in my yard and try to identify what that plant is. So I'm going to open this and say, what is this plant? And then as it's opening that, you can see if you can identify what this plant is. It's a very important plant to be able to identify, especially in the Midwest. Um, but what Gemini was able to say is that this plant is very likely poison ivy. It has the characteristic leaves of three arrangement, and that's a strong indicator. And then some other things about it, if you have any concerns about a rash or possible exposure to poison ivy, it's always best to consult a healthcare professional. So this is something that I've always wanted. Like I go out on trails to do biking, I go out on trails to do like hikes and things like that. And I want to be able to be like, did I just run into poison ivy? Another thing that I do, since I am a gardener, is I recently planted a pear tree. After I planted the pear tree, I noticed something wrong with it. So I'm going to ask, what is wrong with my pear tree? Then I'll make the picture a little larger. If there's any gardeners out there, you might know this, but there are orange spots on here. I did not know what the orange spots were, and I didn't know really what to do with it. So I've asked Gemini, which is generative AI, what should I do with this? And it says, based on the orange spots in the leaves, your pear tree is most likely suffering from pear rust. This actually comes from other trees, sometimes like cedar trees, things like that. And what you need to do is remove the infective leaves and apply a fungicide, which basically, from what I've read on this, I don't need to do that until like sometime after the fall, but I have to make sure all the infective leaves come off the tree and I keep them away from the tree, and then maybe try to find where that's coming from. So again, something that I've always wanted as a gardener, where there's just these emergent things that generative AI can just do naturally. Also note that Gemini is multimodal. I was able to upload a picture to the same exact thing and ask a text-based question. So that's kind of what generative AI is, what people are using it for, but that's the consumer version. And I'm going to go over later the differences with the Oh, I've already seen people saying I cannot process the image as it contains people. Yes, we have a lot of filters and safety things that are done with the very public Gemini, which are things that you actually can configure if you're not using the consumer version and you're using an enterprise version. So I want to quickly level set some terms before we get to more demos of what people are doing with generative AI. First, you'll hear people talk about LLMs or large language models, or more appropriately now, probably language-driven models because they are multimodal. First are models that produce something that's based on semantic meaning of the inputs. They're basically what is the core of generative AI is these large language models. So to use large language models, usually you ask them questions. These questions are made up of either words or characters, and they're broken up into tokens by the large language model. And that's how most large language models will actually do the pricing is by how many tokens you've sent in and how many tokens you've received. Many times you want to decorate that question with more text, and decorating that question makes up a prompt. An example of this is if you say, you are an expert Python software engineer developing an enterprise application, then you tack on whatever that question is about coding or what it is you're trying to code. The act of doing that is called prompt engineering. This is where you're applying all sorts of tricks about writing a good prompt. So if you have like an undecorated question, you might not get the best results. Prompt engineering is decorating that question in such a way that you get better and better results. You'll also hear people talk about parameter efficient tuning. This is more of an advanced topic. However, if this is done right, it's going to save a lot of money by focusing the work that's done by the engineer and by the large language model. The next definition is diffusion. This is the process of tuning out the noise into output. At the core of these language-driven models, it turns words and pictures into these many-dimensional mathematical vectors where the distance from one vector to another is measured to show the similarity. So the result of this math is that things that have similar meaning end up being in closer proximity inside of these databases. So if you take, for an example, like two medical terms, one medical term is heart attack, the other one is myocardial infarction. These two terms do not share any letters. They don't share any words. They don't share any syllables, but they have very similar meanings. They mean roughly a heart attack or myocardial infarction. But in the past, like the ways that we do searching is usually stemming based off a part of the word. Now we can actually put semantic meaning next to one another. Fine tuning is where you train on top of the large language model to the domain of knowledge that's specific to what you want the model to be able to do. This currently is more expensive than RAG architectures, and I'll get more into what RAG architectures are in a little bit. And finally, kind of the idea of modality. This is the type of data that you send into the model or you get out of the model. This could be text, it could be pictures, it could be audio, it could be video, it could be any number of things. It could be the genome, whatever it is that the mode of what you're sending in. So multimodality describes a model that can work with many modes of interaction. And multimodal learning is how Google Cloud's Gemini is trained. It's multimodal at its core, whereas other models use these routing tricks to create the answers by hitting this specific model for a picture, this specific model for text, and then combining the answers, and then possibly going to another large language model to synthesize all of that data, whereas it's a single call into Gemini to do that. So generative AI can be used to enhance human intelligence, human potential, and human purpose. There's four personas broadly that I tend to think about. Interestingly, every one of us is likely at least one of these, if not more, than one of these. The first one is an analyst, also known as a knowledge worker. So this is a software engineer, a product manager, a scrum master, a paralegal, a doctor, anyone that synthesizes data to do their job. Traditionally, you have needed a ton of resources to extract and manage all the complex data sets that you're pulling together to be able to do your job. Large language models are going to speed up this work tremendously, but not eliminate the work. The next person I think of is everyday people or non-experts. This could be both a customer, like an internal person, or a external person, or an employee, like an internal person. Many times this is me. These people, through the use of chatbots, are going to be able to better self-service answers faster. Here, I think of asking a question of HR. Like the question I want to ask is, does the current situation that I'm in qualify me for long-term leave? If I ask this question, I want to get an answer as if I'm talking to the foremost like expert inside of my company. I don't want to spend like 4 days or 4 hours going through like a bunch of documents to try to find the answer. I also don't want to spend like 2 weeks trying to find the person inside the company. I want to ask this question, answer some follow-up questions, and then find the place in the documentation where this actually lives. And this is something that we do with generative AI pretty regularly. Next, we have the content creators and the creatives. And we have examples where you can write the first draft of an entire marketing campaign, complete with different social media posts and blogs with just a few sentences describing what is needed. And then the last one is a data scientist or an AI practitioner. So there's still room for modifying things on top of these large language models specific to your business. So I want to walk through a day in the life of your customer using the best of Google AI to get through their busy day. To do this, I want to walk through 3 examples, possibly more, of morning, noon, and afternoon. So it's morning and I'm just waking up. Large language models or LLMs are great to help us plan, schedule, and organize our lives. I just received a notification that I can launch a quick morning session while I brush my teeth in the morning. So let's go ahead and do that. Give this a minute to come up. Hello.
Good morning. It is Tuesday and that is the day we review finances. Do you have time to review your recent financial activities this morning?
Sure. How is my savings account doing?
Your savings account has not changed since last week. However, you are still on track for your financial goal of purchasing a new road bike before the summer.
That is good. How is my checking account doing?
Your checking account is down from last week by 50%.
Is that normal?
No, it appears that you spent a lot of money at a place called the Hemingway last week.
What day do I get paid?
Based on history, it looks like you have a regular deposit every 2 weeks and you will have a payday in 3 days, this Friday.
Is there anything else?
You have an outstanding fraud alert. Would you like me to connect you with an agent now?
No, I don't have time now. Remind me during lunch.
I will remind you during lunch.
Okay, that was Soul Machines, and that is a third-party avatar that you can layer on top of Google Cloud's Dialogflow. And what I did was I took Google Cloud's Dialogflow and I gave it my bank data ledger, like a fake bank data ledger that we're going to look at here in a second. And the bot used that to respond. So all of the initial responses or whatever were from the bot or whatever, but I kind of locked it down for like, I'm doing a demo in front of a bunch of people or whatever. So I knew what I was going to ask and I knew what she was going to say. But all the initial responses were that was the exact conversation I had with the bot the first time I did this, right? I am interested in, at this point, to always get people's thoughts on what they just saw, because what I usually get is the spectrum from, oh my gosh, Aaron, that is so awesome. I want that on my website right now, all the way over to, you did not prepare me for what I was about to see. That was way too much. Oh my gosh, that was creepy, right? So I get a little bit of both of those. I'm looking at the chat here. I do see some of those things coming through, right? But she did say that I have a fraud alert, right? So it's noon. Now it's lunchtime and I get a notification on my phone to call the fraud department. Large language models can also synthesize complex data to make it more digestible. In the following demo, I'm going to show you what it could look like on the fraud department side of the interaction. I'm going to play the role of the person calling into the fraud department and the person receiving the call here, right? And again, my bank data ledger was used as the basis for this technology, or the base data for this technology, right? So I call in and the person on the other side sees a dashboard. It's very similar to this, right? And here's my bank data ledger of how I spent money over like the last month, right? And I spent $800 on at the Hemingway dining. Hopefully I was taking customers out because that's a lot to be spending at a steakhouse. But I do love steak, so, you know. But when you're actually trying to determine fraud, a few things that you need to know is like, is this person actually trustworthy, right? So we use the large language model to say, go look at this bank data ledger and then summarize it for me in this format. So it'll be the same format every single time. And then the monthly summary is like, here's how much was spent. The highest expense category was housing. So maybe I'm a dependable person because I'm not spending a bunch of money on other things, right? Uh, Most active category is dining and groceries. Again, that Hemingway thing coming up. Usually I use my credit card. Mid-month tends to show higher spending. Well, that was mid-month when I went out to the Hemingway, right? Then insights that utility and recurring payments are stable. So a large language model is able to just take this ledger and tell me those things. So at this point, I want to talk about like RAG architectures. You hear people talking about RAG architectures all the time in generative AI. What that means is RAG, retrieval augmented generator. So the generator is just the large language model. So you ask a question of that large language model, but before you ask the question, we use your question as a search. And then we go search some knowledge base. It could be unstructured data, like a whole bunch of documents. And then it'll pull out excerpts of that document, and then it'll take that and it'll retrieve those things and augment the question that's going to ask of the large language model. This keeps it very focused on the thing that it's trying to answer, right? Here, I'm kind of thinking of a RAG. I'm like, oh, I'm going to use structured data. I'm going to say I'm the human here who's represented by this. So go look up all of my bank ledger, send that in, and then ask my questions, right? So with this bank ledger here, I'm going to run a fraud report to say, please identify where the fraud is at. Because as a human, I just see a spreadsheet, a bunch of things, and I don't know where the fraud is. The large language model has told me that the fraud is likely this local coffee shop for $22.50 here, and I have that one right here. So $22.50 at a local coffee shop. And then the reason is it was made from an unusual device. Usually when I'm interacting with my bank on the go, I use my iPhone, and when I'm at home, I use my Windows PC. And there were multiple failed transaction attempts right here, right? Again, this is somewhat contrived. This isn't my real actual bank data, right? But this is what we can do with large language models. It has a lot of context, and we can ask it questions like this. This is what I call, again, emergent technology. This was not software that was designed to find these type of things. However, it does a pretty good job of this. Okay, now it's the afternoon, and it's time when I need to do something to help wake me up. So I want to play a game of checkers with all of its possible combinations. And this is a game I play almost every day currently. And the reason I play this game almost every day currently is because I always win, right? The reason that I always win is the game that I'm playing against a random number generator. And other engineers on my team are also playing against a random number generator. So as engineers, we usually win because we love playing games, and that's kind of just one of the things that we do. So I make a move here on the checker game, and then the random number generator makes the next move. Now, the graphic down here, if you have ever seen anything on AlphaGo, is very similar to the explanation on how AlphaGo works. If you're familiar with that project, AlphaGo was put out there, and it actually ended up beating the best Go players in the world. What we're doing here to kind of exhibit things, remember earlier I talked about these really long vectors that represent words or whatever? Well, a checkerboard is very much like a very long vector, and we just keep track of each move that's done, and then we save those into the database. And then there's moves that win the game on the red side, and then that's what we're going to train the computer to then use to play against us, right? So when we're taking words or pictures or whatever, we actually put these into a vector form and put them into an embeddings database, and then that's how a large language model works. So the thing that we kind of want to put out there in this example is most people are building chatbots, and chatbots are great or whatever, but there's so many other ways that you can apply this technology to really incredible things. And this is just one example of that. So soon, I think we'll get to where we have our 5,000 moves, and then we'll be able to tune our model, and then we'll have something that can beat us as engineers, which will be a fun day. Okay, after I have my game break, it's now afternoon. And let's see, the first one that I want to do is my contracts demo. And of course, I need to sign in. So it'll give me just a little bit of latitude to do that. Okay. So as this is loading up, one thing that people have to do from time to time is they have to enter into contracts with other parties, right? So I want to evaluate a contract here, and I want to compare this to the terms that I know that the lawyers on my company are actually checking against, right? Because we all know that lawyer time is incredibly expensive. So what this is going to do is it's going to pull out anywhere inside of the contract where a termination clause. I'm not sure why this is painting so weird. Maybe it's because I have a larger screen than I normally do. It's going to pull out anywhere where the termination clause in the contract is brought up. So this first one says upon termination of this agreement, and there's some words here, but it doesn't say how long for written notice, which is actually what I'm evaluating for right now. My standard terms for my company are 60 days written notice of termination to the provider. So this actually scores a 0 because it's not very interesting. But it is good that I know, because the act of doing this, a lot of times I want to be able to pick out everywhere that termination is brought up inside the contract. The second one that it finds actually has to do with at least 90 days prior written notice. Compared to the 60 days of written notice, right? And then I get a score explanation. This one actually scores a 3 because this is not good for me, where contract 1 allows termination without cause, without liability, while contract 2 requires 60 days written notice and best efforts to discontinue services. So what my lawyers are going to expect is different than this. So I do know that we're going to have to probably get the lawyers involved, and we're probably going to have to do some negotiation. When I built this, I was actually working with uh, people in the procurement department and in the legal department. And they said the next step of what they wanted to do was to figure out how to negotiate this. So we have a very simple question as a lawyer would ask: help me negotiate the termination clause, or actually someone in procurement, from 90 days to 60 days. And we do some prompt engineering where we actually tell it the situation of what's going on with some of the information that came from what was going on in this contract. And then we get different strategies. So here's our negotiation strategies and counter strategies. The first one is highlighting inconvenience. We also have industry standards. We have leverage. So now I can be more educated. Every time I run this, I get a slightly different answer. So it's also like an education piece to show me different ways to do negotiation. And when we were working with like the lawyers and the procurement departments, a couple of different companies, they were like, this is really interesting. And this is something that we are looking to build, because who doesn't want to save time, right? Okay, next demo that I have. Not sure why I have to do that, but I have to enter up there. So I talked a little bit about the RAG architecture. That's where we go and look things up inside of your company's knowledge first and send that into the large language model. The other thing that I have been saying since I started talking about this at the beginning of last year is don't go rewrite things that you've already done with your software in using a large language model. It's not necessarily good at it. We've got 20 years of IT where we built things in databases, data warehouses. And if we want to look up facts, databases and data warehouses are amazing for that. So we need to find ways that things will work together. Remember the RAG, we can look things up in a database first and then send that into the generator. Here we can use the generator to actually generate SQL for us based on what the question was. And the way that I've seen this trick work the best is you actually do a little bit of prompt engineering where you send in the question that someone has along with the schema of the database and say, give me a working SQL. And this has been getting better and better with each round of newer large language models that come out. Then you take that generated SQL and you actually execute it to go get the answer. And we can see here, we started with what are the top 5 cities with the most product recalls. And 2 steps here. One is generate the SQL, then execute the SQL, and then we get a table of what those cities are. And I think this is the second architecture that is most likely being used at a bunch of different of my customers at this point. We also have development use cases. So here I want to switch over to right, I'll have to fix that in a minute. But what I want to switch over to is actually, let me. All right. Okay. So we have Gemini available as a plugin that you can plug into your IDE, whether that's Visual Studio Code or JetBrains. And I'm going to share my Visual Studio Code environment here to show what can be done. First thing we have to do is we have to connect to the Google Cloud plugin, which I have connected here. And then the second part is I need to have the Gemini plugin installed. So I'm going to open up this is basically a project that came from the Google Cloud GitHub. And it is a very simple Python tutorial, right? And the first thing I want to show is how we can generate code. So I'm going to take a comment and add a comment here and hit enter. And what will happen is, let's see, let me, a highlight will show up, and I can tell Gemini to generate that that code either by hitting Control Enter or clicking this. Maybe I didn't have it comment. Live demo, right? So now it has actually generated the code that I would want if I wanted to calculate the age at the current date given a birthday. So now I have a very simple Python function that's going to calculate age and basically take today and then subtract the year. And then we also know if we haven't hit the month of the year yet, then we would either go one or two different ways on the age, right? You can also ask general programming questions without leaving the IDE. So one way to identify Gemini, like whether you're using just Google Search or Google Cloud or anything, it's usually this four-pointed star. So this four-pointed star here is actually going to show us where we can set up different things inside of Gemini. And this four-pointed star is going to open up something that we can interact with. There is a test question in here. How do I use Gemini Code Assistant? And then that's going to hit a large language model to give us that answer, right? We can ask all kinds of things about Python here and things like that. The thing that I probably use this for the most is I highlight code and say, please explain this. This is great for if you're inheriting code that you've never touched before, or there's people on your team that are inheriting code. And I know this happens quite a bit. We need to be able to have better velocity while we're trying to get through our sprints. So we inherit some code. We still got to get something done in 2 weeks, and someone needs to understand what this code is doing. So here is the description of this function. This function is called get data session. It manages user sessions for a web application using Google Cloud's Firestore. Here's a breakdown. It gives you some purpose, function definitions, the different variables that are sent in, and all kinds of context on what's going on inside of here. You might have also happened to notice that there was one other piece inside of here that I can generate unit tests. And this one is also one that is super helpful. A lot of times testing becomes way too complicated, way too time consuming, and it's something that's left out. However, it is something that's fairly formulaic, and we found that large language models are really good at this. So we can actually take this code here and generate unit tests. And then if we like what we have here, we can take this and copy and paste it right out into the current file, or we can insert this into the current file. I wouldn't actually insert this here because this isn't the test file, but and then we can diff this with the open file just by the click of a button. All right, so how do we get started? I know, like, I happen to be in sales or whatever, and I know a lot of times, like, to get something off the ground, like, you have to have funding or whatever, and money's important to get things kicked off. But like, when I talk to my customers, a majority of them say this is coming from some centralized budget. So honestly, I really don't care about the money or where that's actually coming from. What's important to me is to see, like, the engineers that I work with successful is that they actually work with senior stakeholders and get them on board from day one and have them understand the value of what they're building. It helps to ensure that We actually talk about return on investment, and that's represented so that the future projects are actually successful. But there's also a group system that can help you set you up for success. At Google Cloud, we found that Center of Excellence framework to be very effective. Center of Excellences are where you start with a small group of people and have them become your expert team, and then you spread that knowledge across the entire organization. And then you embed that into different areas of the company. This is made up of technology and process and people. We talked about the technology some. I showed a bunch of demos, right? And some about the process, but I want to talk about people. To actually have a good team, you're going to need different types of talent. Data is critical for large language models to provide the best answers. So having good data engineers is essential. I have seen that random data audits of the data that engineers are responsible for tied to performance to be a great way to evaluate how accurate the data is, because data cleaning is super important. Honestly, that's the best way to measure it, is to actually figure out a way that it's tied to those people's performance, right? Product strategy. We want to make sure that the goals, it's not just building some science project, that we're actually aligning things into the product strategy of the company. And you also want to incorporate responsible AI to everything that you're building. This differs from every org that I've talked to. We have what we put out as our responsible AI principles in 2017 when we became an AI first company. And I think all companies should actually spend the time to decide what they believe responsibility is with AI. But even if you have the right talent, we know that culture eats strategy for breakfast. The most critical part of a COE model is the culture. So how do you create a strong culture? It's well known that psychological safety is important, and Google's been a pioneer in the HR research. I think we coined the term psychological safety from what is probably one of the longest running HR studies in enterprise history. Like, I continue to answer questions about how things are going in the 3 years that I've been here through our internal processes, so we can continue to understand what psychological safety is. But psychological safety is really hard when everything is constantly changing. New models are coming out all the time, new architectures in this space. Like, we are on the cutting edge of something that's super exciting. So it's a lot different than just building a database application that we've done very similar things for like the last 20 years, right? So we have to acknowledge that newness and continue to iterate and build on what works and get really good with letting go of things that don't. We also have to embrace a team betting culture. So my recommendation is to start small, solve some type of pain point, and that's a great place to begin. So like I said, we build a lot of teams at Google, and if you're thinking putting together some type of team, what we found in the research did and did not matter when we were bringing people together. Seniority does not matter to the output of teams. If you took your most experienced people, it would not guarantee that they would perform better than a team with your least experienced people. Consensus and decision making also does not matter. Bringing people together with different opinions and backgrounds actually leads to a better performance than teams that all agreed with one another. And also individual performance, like however that is measured, I don't think there's really good ways to measure that, right? Taking your top performers and putting all of them on one team does not guarantee success, and putting all of your worst performers would not guarantee that they'd perform any worse. The magic is in actually building of the teams. So these teams at Google have an incredible history of both research and products that change the world. Google's path-breaking work in transformers research and diffusion models is kind of the basis of all the generative AI applications that are seen today. Around the time that Google published the paper, Attention is All You Need, that described the very first transformer in 2017, we became an AI first company. And that was before there was ever a chat GPT, right? Google had 10,000 models already in production of different forms of AI. And according to Forrester Wave, Google's the only company that's in the top right for all of security, data platform, AI platform, and generative AI. And so if you've ever seen the Forrester curve or whatever, like the upper right companies are the ones that both have a strong current offering and then a strong strategy. We have 150 different models that are available in the model garden. Many of them are like you click to deploy, taking away a lot of the toil, which makes it really fast for you, right? However, I want to draw attention to 3 models that were created at Google. The first 2 are Gemini models. These are built to be natively multimodal, like I kind of talked about in the opening, from the ground up. So Gemini 1.5 Flash, this is what I would use for real time and cost effectiveness. It's one of the fastest models that are out there. And Gemini 1.5 Pro, which has the largest context window on the market, where you can send in like an hour of video, ask a question about that video, and then it'll take you to the scene where that's answered, which is just phenomenal. Like if you've seen the demos of this, it's mind blowing, right? And then we have Gemini 2, which is an open source model. And these are great to run on something like a phone. We also have our Imagine model to create images. This is slightly different when you're creating an image. Remember, we sent an image into Gemini. If you want to create an image, you would use Imagine 3, and it's one of the best that I've seen yet. And it also boasts the industry first digital watermark and safety framework so that you can tell that the image was created by a large language model. Is anybody familiar with ELO scoring of large language models? ELO is a scoring that's widely used in chess. You use it to compare the skill levels of 2 players. So Hugging Face has done this for large language models. That we're basically trying to figure out the skill of 2 large language models. So basically, a user asks a question of a large language model, and 2 large language models answer the question, and the user says, "I like these results better," right? So this screenshot here is from March. As you can see, Google Bard is the 4th one down. It wasn't really rebranded to Gemini yet. This space moves really fast. This was in 4th place overall. So you're probably asking, Aaron, don't you work at Google Cloud? Why are you showing us that ChatGPT is better, right? Well, one thing you want to consider is the size of the model. The 3 that are in front are the largest of the large language models. And this is the first of a medium-sized large language model. Like I was talking about Gemini 1.5 Flash, that's a medium-sized model. That's one you would use for real time. These large language models, if you send in a lot of stuff, it could take 30 seconds of processing time and isn't something that you would probably build into an application. The other axis that you want to think about is the cost. So if we take Gemini Pro at this time as a baseline, these ones that are out in front that are larger cost 20 to 60 times more when you're sending in a large amount of tokens. So you want to take that into consideration as you're making the determination of what models to be using. Here is the leaderboard as of the beginning of June. And I've circled the models that are available on Google Cloud. Again, the medium, those are like the faster models. They only lag in ELO scoring by a little bit. You can see like the top one here is 1287, and then Gemini Flash is 1232. In the grand scheme of things, that's not a large difference, right? So I also urge you to kind of take this into consideration as you're choosing models. And this is my screen grab from the leaderboard at the beginning of August, right? Google has moved into the top place. It's the first one. This is a large language model. This is the Pro one that like I was talking about, but this is the first one to score 1300, right? And also 7 of the top 11 models are available on Google Cloud. So things like Meta from the company that owns Facebook and Claude from Anthropic are all available on Google Cloud. So the point of me showing you all of this over the last like few months, right, is to show you that like we're getting higher and higher scores like across the industry, right? And I don't want you to get bogged down in this super heavy analysis of comparing 2 models. I had a lot of customers do that last year where they spent a bunch of engineering time to say, oh, this is marginally better than this or whatever. Because honestly, all that research and all that work is going to be out of date by next year when 2 more generations of these models have come out, right? Further, the prices are coming down regularly, so I wouldn't make a decision solely based on that. The way you probably want to make your decision is more based on your platform, right? So AI and generative AI, if used properly, can have huge impacts on real applications. There's two things I'm hearing happening at all of my customers, right? The application developers, and not just the coders, but also the people in charge of the applications, are wanting to use features like what I just showed in all these demos. And then the second one is boardrooms across the nation are pushing for something to happen at their company. They don't want to get left behind, right? So what does this actually mean for the enterprise? One thing I want to point out is, like I showed you earlier, Gemini, the consumer version, and we uploaded some pictures from my yard, and that's awesome. I've actually used the consumer version. My kids used it to plan a birthday party for their 8-year-old sister that was based on dogs, and it came up with like really a good agenda, and we had a fun time, right? That's a consumer version, right? But this for enterprise related stuff, I want to tell you not to use the consumer version of Gemini, not to use the consumer version of ChatGPT. I want all of my customers and all of my friends, and you guys are all my friends now, like we've spent some time together, right? To know that if you upload something to the consumer version, that becomes part of the model. I like to think about this like Google Maps, right? I'm assuming some of you out there have used Google Maps. We put all of our data into Google Maps, like as your car is moving, and then we all benefit because we can see that up in front of us there's a slowdown due to construction or a wreck or whatever is put in into that model. The same thing happens when you put stuff into the consumer versions of these models, right? I don't like to name company names, but there was a company in Europe last year, very early on, that I think some well-meaning executives uploaded some spreadsheets, and now we can all benefit from that in ChatGPT and look up the profitability if you know any of their SKUs for the last 3 years, right? And I don't want you to say, Aaron said, "Oh, I could go off and use Gemini and upload my company's secrets." Please don't do that, right? So what do you do instead? You want to use an enterprise type of model. So that same large language model that's behind the Gemini that you can connect to on gemini.google.com is frozen and does not get smarter. It's versioned, right? And you set up an adapter layer inside of your Google Cloud project. Now, I say set up an adapter layer, like this is really just a click of a button, like, and we're starting to use this. Then you can build applications very quickly using our conversational AI or enterprise search. Or you can build things from scratch using our Vertex AI platform there. And so this is a very important concept that like your data stays inside of your project and you get to control that, delete it when you want. It's not going to make the centralized model better for anyone else. And then that separation is what's really important for you to utilize the data inside of your business with this brand new technology. So many companies are going to be making the choice on which platform to trust with AI over the next several months or years. As I stated earlier, Google has 10,000 models in production before there was a ChatGPT. We know at Google Cloud the tools that are needed to develop, maintain, and deliver AI and machine learning models. And we expose that to you through Google Cloud, right? An independent study outside of Google done by Forrester showed that there's huge ROI and time savings using the tools inside of Google Cloud. And I'll just leave it at that, right? So how do I get started? If you go to cloud.google.com/pricing, you can get $300 in free credits and you can start playing around with things. If you go to cloud.google.com/free, you can get $1,000 of credits to use the agent builder. That's the one where you can build these apps really quick. I showed you gemini.google.com when I uploaded pictures from my yard. You just log in with a Google identity. A Gmail identity will work. However, I really want to note that do not put any work-related secrets there. We also have aistudio.google.com where you can actually use this and use all kinds of tools here to learn more about like how to interact with this. You don't have to have a programming background at all to use this. There's a lot of the prompt gallery gives you a bunch of examples to use, and you can use that $300 free to get an API key and connect things up here so that this remains safe and not going to that centralized model. And this is actually where I recommend a lot of people that are very curious about this to go play around with generative AI, because it is a safe environment as long as you do the work to do this setup so that it's set up in your environment. And then finally, there's documentation to show the things that I did inside of VS Code and how to get all that set up. Again, you can set that up so that's connected into your Google Cloud that is available at your work, or the Google Cloud that you set up for the $300. And a lot of these, if for small use cases, that $300 goes a long way. You could set up small apps and have them be public and probably run them for the full year and never have to pay really a cent on those. I've seen people actually do that. That $300 goes a really long way. And then that's really all I had. And now we're going to get into questions or whatever. I'm on LinkedIn. Reach out to me anytime. Ask questions. If you ever think that there's something I can do to help you out, I'm totally open to that. Otherwise, we can open it up to the questions. I don't use WebEx very often, so I'll have to find where the questions are. But
If you click down in the lower left-hand corner, there's three dots and it will let you bring them up, or I can just share them and I'll read them to you. So that works too.
oh, I see them now. Now that I'm not sharing, okay,
Okay.
they do. They pop right up.
Big question people are asking is whether they can get a copy of the PowerPoint.
The PowerPoint?
Hmm.
Let me see. I'll work through, Mark. There might be a couple things that I have to clean up on it because the
Okay.
links are live in it.
Mhm.
But yeah, the PowerPoint, I'll create well, it's a slides. Is that all right with you guys?
Yeah,
I'll
that's
create
fine.
a.
That's fine. If
You,
if you
you
have
guys.
if you have a link to it, give it to me and I'll push it out to anybody that came to here. And I put a link in there. It's on our YouTube channel. It'll archive once we're through, so you can watch it there. But if it's easy to do, Aaron, I can send it out to people. If not, they can watch the video of it again.
Awesome.
Okay, so
And a big plug, Google Slides is incredible. Like if you haven't
yes.
given it a chance, PowerPoint's all right. Google Slides awesome.
John Patton is asking, how can organizations align AI integration with agile principles to maximize innovation and adaptability?
Ooh, that's a great question. Um, so I see this very similar to, and that's why I did the whole bit on centers of excellences. It's so new at this point, and I have seen people waste time, and I don't want anybody to go out there and waste time and do science projects. I think you should be working with some kind of partner outside of your company that understands these things, building a center of excellence, and then figuring out what your backlog is, right? Now, what should you work on? The way that I usually describe this is you've got this backlog of things that in the past you've tried to build them and it sucked, right? Like you tried to build a rules engine or you tried to build all these things. Those are the ones that you want to dust off the backlog and say, oh, wait, we might have the technology that can actually do this now. You don't want the stuff that's like normal that you've been doing, connecting to a database and creating a live application, because that stuff, quite frankly, there's better technology for that and it's more hardened, right? What we want is actually things that have to do with a lot of times conversational pieces and decision making to some degree.
Okay, next question. Should people be concerned that, I think you kind of answered this, but should people be concerned that feeding info into an AI might get leaked? For example, is there any way we could ask Gemini, what is Aaron saving money for and where does he like to eat?
Absolutely. Should you be concerned about this? Yes. What you
Okay.
need to do is make sure that there is education inside of your company, similar to what I shared with you today. And it's not a one-time thing. What we've seen in the research is it takes 3 weeks. It takes three
Okay.
weeks of repeatedly saying the things that I said for that to get through, because sometimes people aren't in that meeting. Sometimes you know what I mean? Like it
Mhm.
does take time and it is something you have to beat the drum. that like there is a consumer version and then there's an enterprise version. Make sure that you are not putting our company's information in the consumer version. Set it up in a way that it is sectioned off.
Okay, next question. Do you see any possible future where developers are replaced with generative AI for creating software?
I don't actually. One thing that I will say is, if you haven't yet, this was written by a Googler. The singularity is nearer. He wrote another book 20 years ago called The Singularity is Near. What I see happening is that the world will change, and what a developer does will be different. Will the jobs go away? No, someone still has to create things and think in the way of what's going to happen in this application and what is it we're going to bring to our customers. Now, will you write as much Python code as you write today? Maybe not. Um, but to be fair, like there's a lot of stuff that's boilerplate anyways. And there's a lot of copy and pasting off of Stack Overflow, right, wrong, or indifferent. What this is going to do is speed that up. So the people that try to push this away and say that it's not relevant may not be as successful as the people that embrace it and figure out how to get more productive.
Okay, now here's an interesting question. Um, in the example, I think if it's generating unit tests based on existing code, isn't that going to just embed any subtle bugs that are present in the code into the unit tests?
Good point. Part of the reason is part of what we're talking about here is this is not going to make the writing of unit tests go away. It's going to make it faster, right? So a lot of times it's a matter of there's not enough time. And I've always been a proponent that more tests are better than no tests, right? Assuming that they are decent tests. The other thing that you can ask that I didn't ask is find the bug in this code, right? And whether it finds a bug or not, it's like actually having someone sitting right next to you and you're pair programming with them, right? So it might hallucinate and not give you a good bug or whatever, but it might give you something you're like, oh, I didn't think about that. That actually isn't a bug, but that makes me think I should probably clean this part up,
Huh?
right? So I would use it for that general conversational look at my code and tell me something about it.
We had Jason Sweat was on here a while back, and he was he was using AI to say, give me a unit test that would prove this, and then feeding the unit test back in and saying, okay, now give me code that will make this unit test pass. So it's kind of flipped it around. It was an interesting idea. I don't think the technology was quite there to make it super fast yet, but gave you an idea of what might be possible. Very interesting. Oh, somebody wants to know what type of road bike are you getting?
I'm really partial to Eric's Bike Shop, which has specialized roadwear, and I currently have a specialized Allay.
Um, Somebody saying, would you personally trust any LLM on the market with sensitive data like your bank information?
Not a consumer version.
Okay.
An enterprise version that's kind of behind inside of a project. We've built a ton of different things where we're sharing data inside of there.
Um, have you seen anyone generating end-to-end Selenium or API automated test cases?
I have not, but there are, I believe the number is 12 different uh, languages that Gemini has been trained on for those plugins. And I don't see why you couldn't. I have seen that like it doesn't do as well with like HashiCorp's Terraform. So Selenium might be in that gray area. What's going to happen very soon is that big million token or 2 million token context window is going to be built into this. And this is speculation. I don't know how this is going to work when this actually comes out, but you could put your whole code base into there. And then if you cached it, you could ask questions about your code base. So you could have it generate code in the way that your code base would generate code. And in that case, maybe if you've got a lot of examples of Selenium already, then it would do better. But out of the box, things like Selenium, I don't know. You would have to test. I have not actually done the testing, so I'm unsure.
Um, Seeing so many ads for AI marketing and more, or images like professional shots and more, how do you know which AI engine to use? I think you kind of addressed that a little bit when you were in the graphics and stuff you're showing. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, one thing that I'll say, like the Gemini that I showed, I think someone showed the Air or whatever, like it does not work with human faces at this point. Like that is a the public one. Um, I don't know. If you feel like you trust it, then that's good for you. I don't use a lot of the commercial products or whatever, but I also have access to some of the best engineering tools in the world. So,
And here's I think this will probably be the last question because we're at time. But how sensitive are these models to developer bias, and how do you evaluate that? Can a model evaluate one another and identify the bias? What are thoughts on that?
ooh, that's a very interesting question. I'm unsure if I understand the question though. Like developer bias in that like this developer likes to comment in a certain way or
Tom, I think that was
No,
your question. You want to talk about?
it's
Yeah.
the people who are creating the models themselves.
oh yeah.
You know, the
Um
model's based on a certain corpus of data and whatever, and da 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 da. Are there
so
ways for
there
models to know that they're biased or not?
so the models themselves, I don't know the everything's as good as the data that's put into it. And these large language models come from such a large corpus of data. The textual based ones, I don't think that bias plays into it as much. But as I was talking about, there's architecture built on top of them that either does some kind of responsible AI type of stuff. And that is going to be very similar to all of the bias that you would have in any other software, right? Because that's programmatic things like saying, okay, based on this, I'm going to route this to this large language model. Based on this, I'm going to route this to this large language model, and then safety filters on the way back. Something is brought back, and then it says, based on rules or whatever, send this back in and give me a different thing, or send it to 3 large language models, and then like so. A lot of the architecture-based stuff, yes, the model itself they're so large, it's really like the bias is going to come from did we miss a data set that we could have benefited from?
Okay. Okay.
And there may be a certain amount of bias just that's inherent in the human race. That's going to be hard to, if
Uh,
we've got sometimes that type of thing will probably
Absolutely.
be reflected in the text corpus and stuff. But
Yeah.
well, hey, Aaron.
So a lot of
but
the data, okay, I do want to make one more point. A lot of the data
Awesome.
is coming from the internet, right? The internet has this wide spectrum of some of the best explanations in the world of how things work, all the way over to some of the most vile things you can say as a human being, right? And it's like this, that's that's where it gets its data from. So it's going to be a mix.
Cool. Hey, Aaron, thank you so much for taking the time to walk through this. I know for me it was really helpful just getting some of the vocab down that I've heard pieces and didn't understand all of it. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else has too. But thank you for taking the time. I threw the link to the recording in the chat. If you do get the PowerPoint, or I'm sorry, if you do get the Google Slides link out and send it to me, I'll pass that on to everybody. Next week, we're talking about successful sprints. So if you know of anyone interested in that, you should have a invite in the next 24 hours. Pass that on to anyone on your team that you think might be interested in that. And once again, thank you, Aaron, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great rest of your day.